So to get started, let me introduce Jim to you just a little bit. Many of you know Jim, but he's a registered professional engineer, has 28 years of experience plus in the transportation field. He was named NCDOT's Chief Operations Officer in 2009. As you know, he's played a key role in the department's effort to professionalize its decision-making process and become a performance-based organization with emphasis on accountability and transparency. And that's been evident, I think, over the last few years since 2009, especially with the current passage of our new transportation law here in North Carolina. His prior experience comes from NCDOT as well as the private sector and academic areas on issues related to transportation. He began his career in 1985, like a lot of you out there. He was a highway engineer. After holding a number of positions in the engineering field, he was named Division 4's Division Engineer in 2000. He later worked with the North Carolina General Assembly as the Director of Strategic Transportation Planning, where he made recommendations and provided analysis on transportation issues and helped draft transportation legislation. In addition to his career here at NCDOT, Jim has more than 3 decades of military service. His duties included serving in Honduras and Ecuador, overseeing road and school construction, as well as infrastructure improvements in Italy. After being selected to command the 105th Engineer Group, his unit was mobilized during the global war on terror to provide command and control for security forces at U.S. Army installations in North Carolina and Virginia. His unit again was mobilized in 2006 during Operation Iraqi Freedom to command and control 2 engineer battalions and provide assured mobility and general engineering support within northern Iraq. Major General Trogdon now serves as the Deputy Adjutant General for the North Carolina National Guard. Jim earned his Master's of Strategic Studies at U.S. Army War College, a Master's in Civil Engineering with a minor in Statistics and Computer Science at NC State, and a Bachelor's in Civil Engineering at NC State. Jim resides here in Raleigh with his wife Karen and his children. It gives me great pleasure in welcoming our Chief Deputy Secretary of Operations, Jim Trogdon.
Well, thanks, Jimmy, and thanks for everyone, certainly for the invitation to be here and speak. It's a privilege, and after 23 years, I guess I'm never without a few things I'd like to say, and so this is bringing it all to a point here. And everyone listening in on live meeting, thanks for taking the time out of your day. I guess it's always important to talk first about, what's the mission, what have I learned? And I'll tell you, in every job I've had is always clearly understand what your mission is. And we go to great extents at putting mission statements, but for me, it's always, I like it simple. So as long as I've been, especially working with the divisions and then here as the Chief Operating Officer, I just say our job is to assure mobility for the state. And it's almost been the same mission I've had both in the military and here at DOT. But really to understand that, you also have to understand your history. And so I thought it would be very important to talk a little bit about the history of the department, especially since 2015 will bring, which is just a few short years away, will be our 100th year in existence. So this may be a prompt to plan something during 2015 because I think that's definitely going to be worthy of recognition. But the department really started in 1915 and started small as an enactment of the General Assembly and then really cranked up at a really critical time in our existence between 1919 and 1929. And what happened during those years really set the stage for who we are today. We went from very few roads and very few control. Initially in 1919, it was about 1,000 miles of road responsibility. Then by 1929, it was nearly 6,000 miles of paved roads. And it was from the efforts of a few people, and one I'll talk a little bit about at the end. But that was at a time when we had no revenue source. So the General Assembly, Governor Morrison at that time, and a gentleman that I'll mention at the end, Frank Page, was really the ones that helped North Carolina be one of the first states to establish a motor fuels tax. Oregon was the first, and we were in the top 4. And then one of the first to sell bonds to finance road construction. So by 1929, the department had between 114 and 140 million dollars worth of bonds at any given time sold. And that doesn't sound like a lot today until you apply inflation to it, and it ends up, and we got Mark Foster back here, I'm sure can check my numbers, but it'll end up being equivalent to about 14 billion today if you inflate it from those times. Which is why you looked at North Carolina and said we had the largest road construction program in the nation between those years. It's phenomenal. So you think about how we transitioned from that into then in 1931 assumed the 45,000 miles of county roads out there, which really set the stage, which made us for about 4 decades the largest state maintained system in the nation. And then Texas surpassed us a little later, and then most recently we surpassed them, but we're pretty equal still today. But that created, the challenges that we face. We provide most of the road transportation services across the state, even today, with the exception of the 20,000 miles. That's 80,000 miles for North Carolina DOT and 20,000 miles for municipalities spread across the 563 municipalities in North Carolina. So it's been a challenge. And then after the 30s and the 50s, the program was pave all the unpaved roads, which was very popular because that allowed people, every one of these things allowed people greater access to opportunity. And then in the 1989 trust fund was passed, which allowed us to build 4-lane roads within 10 miles of 90% of the population, to build urban loops, and then to pave the remainder of the unpaved roads in North Carolina, which was the goal. And so to bring you up to date, out of that successful program, we've accomplished a little more than half of the urban loops, about 78% of the 4-lane roads that were originally planned in 1989, and a little more than 92% of all the unpaved roads. So pretty successful. What are the challenges, though, as we move forward? I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute, but I would like to say since 2009, when I came back to the department, we've made substantial progress in a lot of these areas, focused primarily, and some of the guys are sitting in the back, how do we prioritize projects? How do we make things more data-driven? How do we do things that builds confidence with the citizens and the people that we serve, so they believe that everyone has a fair shake? Everyone has an opportunity to transportation solutions in a rational manner. And that was one of the things, and because I like to go back to the 20s, that was one of the things that the department did so well in the 20s, was to be very open, very problem-solving oriented, making significant impacts in all 100 counties. That's why the General Assembly allowed them to take over all the county roads, because even the counties had more confidence in the department's ability to maintain those than they had in their own, which was significant. And so that's really the same kind of challenges that we were facing in the end of the 1915 through 1919 were the same kind of challenges that we saw coming in 2009. And so what are some of the trends? I do want to talk about some of the trends that we'll see moving forward, because I think no matter how much success we believe we've had and how much improvements we've had over the last 5 years, I think the challenges are going to create an environment where they will be more significant and the demands will be greater than we've ever seen. Population trends, 50% population growth between now and 2030 in North Carolina. And the one that I like to think about closer in is the 1.3 million increase that we know we will see in the next 10 years. That's significant because, as you all know, and the trends haven't changed, with whatever your population growth, your vehicle miles travel increases about 2.5 times greater than the population trend. So people tend to drive much greater than just the population. That has trended down somewhat during the recession, but we don't think that is a long-term trend. We do believe, and I think you know this, with the younger groups coming in, they will not drive as much as we did. When I turned 16, well, I hate to admit it, but I was actually driving a lot before I turned 16 and got my driver's license. I don't think the commissioner can do anything to me now. But those trends aren't the same. 16, 17, 18-year-olds now at a higher percentage don't have their driver's license today. Why? Because the demands aren't there. They're connected in other ways. And so we know that's going to change somewhat, but in the longer term, with the kind of numbers we'll see coming into North Carolina, the travel demands, not just for roads, but for all other modes of transportation, will continue to increase. Revenue will decline if we do nothing. And Mark covers this very well with the board and others, but the wonderful things that we've relied on in the past for revenue, motor fuels taxes, DMV fees, and highway use taxes, will not sustain the needs and the growth as we move forward, and particularly motor fuels revenues will decline because of the fuel economy that's moving from what is now about an average of 25 miles to a gallon. By 2014 will be 34 miles to the gallon. By 2025 will be 54 miles to the gallon. So you can see, even if our rates hold the same, which we don't anticipate they will be able to, the actual tax rate, the revenue will decline rapidly due to the declining usage. So what does that do as far as challenges? That means we have to come up with a new plan, and that's something that we are taking a very aggressive approach on and are working on today. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But we do see the same kind of shifts that we've seen over history. What was North Carolina, what did it look like before 1920, and how it changed between 1920 and 1940, what it looked like post-World War II, and how it changed, and if you think about the growth of the mill villages across North Carolina and how that provided the opportunity for people to leave farms and go to work for a higher paying, higher skilled job, which with much more benefits in mill towns, that was a dominant shift that now is shifting the other way. Because of trends in the global economy, those jobs have left. Those mill villages are struggling. So what does that mean for us? That means that we'll continue to see 20 of our 100 counties over the next 10 to 20 years growing rapidly, 60% growing modestly or very little growth, and 20 counties shrinking. Right now, 67% of employment resides in 30% of the counties in North Carolina. That's a startling statistic. So as everyone that works with us and works with me knows, that travel time, no matter what mode of transportation, is one of the dominant and critical measures that we will be measuring ourselves, measuring our projects on, and the three guys that are most engaged with that are back there, and they know that. Travel time and travel time savings is what we're focused on. How do we improve our transportation system through that measure? Because that will help not only the people looking for opportunity in the areas with shrinking population, the people that are looking for opportunities in the areas that need more growth, and the people that are in the high growth area where plenty of opportunity lives, but now it's their ability to get there because everyone wants to use the same facility at the same time. So travel time savings is the one thing that unites all of those challenges. And we know our citizens will demand more mobility and more mobility choices, and so we know as we move forward, that's the key metric that we believe will help change our future from one, if we do nothing, to pretty bleak, to here's how we build the vision for transportation and the opportunities. I won't talk about how I got here. I think Jimmy gave a good update on my career path, other than to tell you, I believe that I was very fortunate, and it goes back to one of my military mentors who used to tell me sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I think I was lucky to find myself in just the right assignment to build the capability that I need for the next one that I didn't know was coming. And so it's how you make sure you're always gaining the best examples and learning environment in whatever assignment you're in, because you never know when you're going to need it. And that's one of the things that I believe has helped me prepare myself for what was going to be the next challenge, was trying to gain the most out of my existing opportunities as possible. What have I learned, and I'll say this as an organization, what have we learned, I believe, since I took this role in 2009? And once again, Mark is back there. I'm sure he'll agree with most of these, but our funding sources will not sustain our existing strategies or the strategies that we're moving to until we do something else, and I'll talk about that something else in just a minute. But we believe our new strategies, and I couldn't say this a year ago, our new strategies will much better in line with meeting our future demands. A year ago, I would have to say, and I always did say, our existing strategies will not meet our future demands. So now we are moving a very positive direction to achieve that. One of the more important things as an engineer, because as you're trained as an engineer, one of the things that you're typically not very good at, and my two, when I was in engineering school, was the English language and finance. I think I've learned a lot on those two areas before I got to this job. But one of the most important lessons in transportation that I think we're still hoping many of our transportation partners actually learn this a little better is financing is not revenue. And so many times, and I will put a knock on one of the shows I do like to watch. If you ever get up on Sunday morning and watch NC Spin and you hear people talk about how, well, we need to solve these transportation problems with a new bond, I will tell you that's folly. Without revenue, you will not have lending. And so financing is a tool, and Mark is very good at helping us with that, but our solutions will not be through borrowing, it will be through revenue. And one of the biggest challenges from my perspective is right now transportation is assumed in general by many of the users and our citizens to be an entitlement. Not a service or a utility. And I think that's one of the opportunities we need to do in the future, is shift from the general tax revenue structure and funding transportation the way everyone says it's free and it's free forever, to a fee for service or an entitlement. And a good statistic is one that we published recently, where a survey of citizens say the average citizen spends about $119 a month on electricity, $115 a month on cable, $84 a month on their cell phone, $24 a month on coffee, and only $60 a month in funding transportation through our motor fuels tax. And yet, very little complaints about the costs of the others, an extensive amount of complaints about what's paid in motor fuels tax. So somehow we have to change that. And I think that's part of the good part of our legacy here at DOT, was over the last 8 years, we've done a good job in providing transportation, like many of our neighboring states have, that citizens believe that this is something that is free and should come without any cost. And we all know here that that's not true. Where are we today? Still with Texas is about tied with them with the largest system that we maintain. Some of the metrics that some of these have changed over the last year. We just haven't measured them yet, but we know they've changed. But we were 24th out of the 50 states in urban interstate condition, which I believe has improved, and our next pavement condition rating should show that. 35th out of 50 in rural interstate condition, 41st out of 50 states in bridge condition, which we know that's changed with our robust bridge program that we have now. 42nd out of 50 states in interstate congestion. 10th out of 50 in motor fuels tax rate. And everyone likes to point at that as a weakness. However, I always like to provide the next one, which puts that into context, and 49th out of 50 states in revenues and expenditures per mile. And so the challenge is with motor fuels, yes, it's 10th highest rate in the nation. However, we're so dependent on it and a few other sources that I always like to say, if this was a stock portfolio, we would be woefully under-diversified and woefully underfunded as compared to all of the states in the nation. So what do we need to do to be successful? Continue to build confidence and trust with all of those that we serve, the citizens, the transportation groups, the municipalities, the General Assembly, everyone that we serve. We've got to continue to engage, partner, and build trust and confidence. That's the only way anyone will be able to change what will be the ultimate outcome over the next 10 years. If we don't do anything different, we will see continued decline. The only way that will change is to build that trust and confidence, keep talking about these challenges, keep offering solutions that these large collaborative organizations can support, and then the solution will be provided. But in order to do that, we still have to be and must be, and one of the governor's priorities for us is efficiency, and I just like to say it as be great stewards of our existing resources. Because if we're not, we tend to have those things pointed out by others, like our citizens, like our media that supports and reports on transportation. And that's the worst way to have your deficiencies pointed out, which is one of the other things that we must continue to get better at, and we have, is building the tools to do our own assessments to improve ourselves without it being imposed on by others. One of the large challenges that we've had, and as I said, we're moving in the right direction, but how do we make sure that we continue to maintain the right balance of needs, plans, and resources? And for many years, our needs were measurable. We can look at many studies that either we've done or outside organizations have done, and they continue to be fairly comparable in their conclusions, and that is the needs will continue to grow and they're substantial in North Carolina. So then how do we then equally develop the plans to address those needs in balance with the resources? And so I like to say this is a three-leg stool, and if any of those three legs are not in balance, it tends to be an unstable situation. So right now we've moved from having one leg much longer than the other two to now I believe two legs coming into balance, which is the needs and the plans. And so now we've got to get the plans and the resources in balance so that all of that will be a stable transportation solution as we move forward. House Bill 817 was the first step in that, which allows us to change our equity formula, which had been in existence for 24 years, to one that will focus on those highest priority projects and improving travel time and doing those things that supports all of our counties in a way that will make us not only a good place to travel, but very competitive in the global economy. And that's ultimately what will determine success. Phase two is that revenue and resource piece. Where do we go to reduce our dependency on motor fuels, to reduce that down ultimately and increase other things, not necessarily just rates, but broaden the base on where we achieve and where we obtain transportation revenues, and do it in a way that still supports the user pay public utility type model that will certainly reduce our dependence from the General Assembly having to make all the decisions that they currently have to make, with a limited number of revenue options. And that's where we're moving. As I said earlier, we have to continue to stress the priorities. One of the governor's priorities is efficiencies, and we've been doing that successfully across the department and all the agencies. And if you paid attention in the media, particularly DMV and some of the pilot programs, that's a great example of substantial improvement that can be achieved with just good teamwork and partnering and building an environment where everyone has a stake in solving the problem and improving efficiency and improving customer service. And that's the objective we need across the department. So what can you do to help with this effort? You know, I've limited it to a few. Keep helping us build relationships. That is one of the most important things that we can do, not only internally between all the functions that we provide, but even more importantly, externally to all the customers, whether they are municipal planning organizations, rural planning organizations, local government, citizens groups. All of those helps us be more effective. Establish policy and vision. We are continuing to do that, but that is a very collaborative effort. And you don't know what you don't know. So we've got one of the most robust changes that we've had in many years that is going into effect. And like anything new and change, nothing is perfect. So the difference is we can't wait for perfection to start. So we're starting the movement, we're learning things, but we're listening and learning from others and taking all of that information and then adjusting while we're moving forward. And I think that is one of the most critical things we can continue to do. Continue to evaluate our plans and programs. And this is one that I've always told employees who work directly for me for years, but you know, if it's broke, fix it. If it needs improvement, improve it. And if it's inefficient, change that. Don't ask for permission. You know, you are responsible for every problem that's out there and responsible to solve it. And so don't ask for permission to do the right thing. Every employee in this department is empowered to do the right thing. You just need to be accountable in that ultimate decision. Was it right? But if it was right, it was the right thing to do. And one of the most important things after engaging the stakeholders and partners, though, is continue to be great ambassadors for transportation, and this was equally important, good government. One of the most significant things I've seen change over the last 23 years is our citizens' perspective on government and how necessary it is. As one that's had the opportunity to travel in about at least a dozen different countries and serving democracy in the United States Army, I can tell you we have the greatest system of government in the world. If you don't believe it, go anywhere who doesn't have one. I can assure you stability comes through governance and security and an economy, and all three of those have to be working in parallel. And we have it here, but it's up to all of us to make sure that our citizens retain their confidence that government is working for them, not on them. And that's a significant difference. And then in the end, I think it's really up to each individual employee to be a servant leader, to be here and serve our state. You're in public service, and sometimes that really takes a lot of commitment, but the commitment is there, and we know it's critical. So the story of Frank Page, he was the chairman of the commission then, which was essentially the same as my job, or a combination of my job and the chief engineer, from 1919 to 1929, responsible for taking us from less than 1,000 miles of state roads to over 6,000 miles in that 10-year period. And all of those were paved, 6,000 miles paved, still had some unpaved. One of the first to help the state implement motor fuels tax, first bond sales of states across the nation, largest construction program in the nation, most rapid growth in transportation, and really changed the economy, and had the reputation of being one of the most knowledgeable people in transportation in North Carolina for about 2 decades, even though he only worked for the department for 10 years. He did do other things in North Carolina after. His background was 2 years at, I try not to hold this against him, but 2 years at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And then he served in World War I as a Corps of Engineers, military officer, building roads and railroads in France during the war. Came back and did the phenomenal job that he did. And I bring him up because after his death, there was an editorial in the newspaper here in Raleigh that talked about, you know, as you look around the state, there's not a monument or memorial to him anywhere. And the response was, well, all you have to do really is look around, and there's 6,000 miles of monument to Frank Page. So after 23 years, I like to leave thinking there's many monuments to my service here and the teamwork that we build and we have built. And every one of these, and I wanted to list a few, every one of these was really through great collaboration, teamwork, problem solving, and our state employees and engineers wanting to serve the public. These were monuments to teamwork, to good government, and to public service. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jim. We appreciate those remarks. I'm sure it's got all of us thinking about some things. We probably have a few questions, if you don't mind taking a shot at those. So with that, let me get started. We have already had some questions submitted prior to the webinar. So the first one up is, what career advice can you offer to fellow engineering peers?
For all engineers, be a subject matter expert in whatever is your passion. And then you'll know you'll be strong in that. Then within yourself, do the best you can. And I've used things like, 360 evaluations, talking to people, but then identify your own shortcomings and do the best you can in improving those, which means you'll have to be in position that those are demanded, because typically it's hard to improve things that no one's asking you to do. But it's be a subject matter expert, and then be your harshest critic on the things that you're not good at, because those are things that you'll have to improve on your own.
Okay. When leading a large team, what are the keys to effective leadership?
Clear vision it has to be the first. So establish a clear vision. Like I say here with staff, make sure everyone's hooking to the wagon and pulling in the same direction. That's always very important. I would say understanding that, especially with large teams, there's no one size fits all. It takes all different kinds of perspectives to help you establish a clear picture, and then use those perspectives to understand the total problem, not just the perceived problem, and you'll see success.
All right. What have you learned from NCDOT that you will use to be effective in private business?
Almost every problem that gets to my level is usually complex. And any complex problem typically is not a DOT-only solution. So it's how you can establish a range of alternatives that can solve this complex problem, identify the stakeholders that you need to have to help support one of those options, and then realize that there's typically no black or white answer. there's no right or wrong. There's a range of options, and whichever one you can achieve consensus on is progress. Do it. And that's typically the rule I use in solving the problems that we have here.
Okay. All right. Can you give us your definition of a leader?
One, unafraid to solve problems, to deliver services, and then has the capability of providing purpose and direction and motivation for others on the team.
Do you perceive any additional structural changes to be made throughout NCDOT?
I perceive over the next 5 years that the most persistent thing will be change, whether they're structural, organizational, change in demands, change in processes. And I think that's not anything unique to North Carolina. That is unique to the world, in that we're in a time that things are evolving and changing rapidly, whether it's technological, whether it's economic, and those that can respond succeed, and those that cannot change and evolve become irrelevant, and you don't stay irrelevant long in this environment before you're non-existent. So if you're not changing and evolving rapidly to meet new demands, then you'll be irrelevant.
Okay. All right. I'd like to turn to the room here and see if there's anyone present that would like to ask a question of Jim, since we have his attention for a few more minutes. I'll open the floor up. Don't be bashful now, come on. Nothing? Okay. Well, I have a few more, Jim.
Yeah.
What is the best piece of leadership advice that you would give to our employees today?
In order to be a good leader, you have to be respected. And the only way to achieve that, I think, is through values. And especially over the last 15 to 18 years, both in the military and here in DOT, I think I've always used values of courage, and that would not be, the type you would think of in a combat environment, but more of what I used to talk to soldiers or maintenance workers or engineers with, is the courage to do the right thing, especially when no one is watching. That's the part that's the most important. Competence, be the subject matter expert in your functional area. Character, which is probably one I should use first, because especially in government, if you have character flaws or challenges, they will quickly be found and leveraged by others. And then the last is the way I frame it is discipline, and that is have a disciplined lifestyle where you're doing, you get up every day, you're there on time, people can count on you, and they know that when they ask you to help solve the problem, you will respond, and you'll be thoughtful and disciplined in all your actions. Now, and I will tell you, especially since Vicky's here, who's my administrative assistant, I don't equate discipline to organized, and she can vouch for that. So don't confuse those two terms. I do not.
Well, Jim, tell us what your most difficult challenge has been in your DOT career.
I would say that's pretty easy. And it has more to do with building partnerships with especially with the General Assembly, because almost everything we do, they have strong budgetary oversight, or they want to be confident that we're doing the right thing for the citizens. The hardest thing always is it's easy to identify a problem. It's easier to identify some solutions. The hardest part is identifying at least one that you can build enough support to implement. And I learned this in my 3 years working with the General Assembly. The problem line is long, the solution line is usually empty, and the ones that can identify those range of good alternatives and a good grassroots foundation of support for at least one of those typically see success. And it's doing that, I think, is always the hardest here, both at DOT or in any state agency in North Carolina or any state in the nation. And that is getting the solutions that you can build enough consensus on. And that takes an enormous amount of effort, information, collaboration, partnering, and a lot of dedication and extra time.
Are there any specific role models that you have looked to over the years for advice and mentoring?
Probably indirectly everyone I come into contact with. I won't bore anyone with military leaders, DOT leaders. There's been plenty, but it's what do you learn from everyone you engage with, because everyone has something to teach.
Very good advice. From your engineering and NCDOT career, what has been your greatest accomplishment so far?
I would say the thing that I would be most proud of is not really a personal accomplishment, but it's the reputation of the department in being a strong partner now with local governments, MPOs, legislature. We are a strong partner. We engage and we are there to help solve problems, and I think that's what I am most proud of.
All right, the last question I have that's been submitted so far, if anyone else has any questions, please go ahead and submit those. We'll try to answer them. We have a few more minutes left. Last question that we have here, a lot of folks have asked, and it's pretty simple, but we realize it may be a difficult answer for you. Why are you leaving NCDOT?
Opportunity, I think, is significant. And so that's what's driving my decision, and the fact that I've always had a philosophy, and I know I've got some employees that have worked with me for many years that are here, that one of them just told me the same thing that I told him, I guess it was almost 10 years ago. And my advice was, plan on staying in a job 4 years because you typically learn what you can learn in 4 years. You do what you're good at, you accomplish in 4 years. After that, you're probably impeding progress and stunning your own growth. And so, but everyone has to look at that individually. That was mine now, and I'm coming up on 5 years in January. So for me, I can either retire now with 5 years of service in this job, or if I stayed to 30, it would be 13 years. And the one lesson that was impressed on me early as a young engineer here was I saw one employee that came in, had 35 years of service, and he left in the same job that he came in. Wonderful person, but we didn't do that person a service, and then the organization couldn't grow because of that. And so I never want to be the one that is in the way of progress or stunning my own growth and not being able to learn new things from a different perspective.
Okay. I've had one more question come in. During your engineering career, if you had a chance to do something different, if given the opportunity, what would that be?
probably wouldn't have stayed 4 years in some jobs. And I would have spent a little time in construction and structures, in planning and Padilla, and roadway, which I didn't have any opportunities in serving in, and also would have spent some more time, quite a bit more time, working in Calvin's shop and programming, because once I got to this level, I found out that the easiest part was the design and the delivery and the construction, and the hardest part was the financing and programming. So I would have gotten a little more in some other areas that I missed, but I was fortunate, especially since getting to the job I'm in today, was having great people and getting crash courses in a few hours of time spent to give me 6 months worth of experience. And so we've got great leaders here. And great subject matter experts, but those are the things I would have spent some time in those areas, but seeing that I could not, we do have great assets already there and people that know these things very well. So rely on them.
Okay. Good advice.